So let's jump into some daily Bitcoin analysis. In front of you, you can see the Bitcoin chart that's roughly marked up in the same way that I did in the explainer video before. But you'll notice that there's a yellow trend line on this chart that we didn't draw in the previous video. So this is actually something that a lot of people have been speaking about on Twitter and in different forums and such, and I want to mention it as well. So that yellow line is the trend line if we switch into log mode. So right now, this is just on a normal linear chart, the red line, and we can see that we have some nice touches, and we've actually broken through this trend line yesterday, and we're now above it. But if we switch into log, we can see that we have a touch here, a touch here. We don't quite make it here, and we're approaching it now in the current candle. This is kind of an interesting little dynamic that's moving here, because a lot of people religiously use log charts to draw trend lines like this, and other people say no, we need to stick to the linear charts. So this is kind of a good little experiment to see which school of thought is prevalent or more prevalent here on Bitcoin. One thing to note here is if we switch back into the linear chart, we did break through this trend line yesterday, but the volume was just not there, it was lacking. And usually if we're breaking a major resistance point like a trend line like this that's been playing out over weeks and months, I would really expect a big push, a big volume candle to really thrust through that resistance. But we haven't actually seen that at all. So maybe that means that the log trend line is more in play than the linear one. So if we're assuming that the log trend line is more in play than the linear one and is going to give us a better representation of how the market's moving, what would be a good scenario that could play out here? Something that I'm really looking at here is this resistance level around the 11.7 area. And the reason for that is we had a lot of flat top resistance over here, and then we plunged. We made our way all the way back up. We found that resistance again, and then we dropped again. That tells me that that's a pretty significant resistance area. So if we can punch up through that, I'll be looking to buy when we get back into that area. We've got this log line here. So I'm looking for something like this. So we punch up through, then we maybe find some resistance up in this area, then come back around here, find some support on that previous resistance, and then move up. So that'll be something that I'm looking at. Where I set my targets on that trade is something that I'll decide if that scenario actually plays out. That would be a fantastic level to buy, in my opinion, if we can firmly break up through and we can retest that from above. And like I've said, when the market price is above a level, we want to be looking at the previous resistance areas. So if we break up through here, this really strong level is previous resistance. And now we'll be looking to retest it as support. And that will be an area that I'll be looking to get involved. I'll just remove this little sketch from the chart. So that's the longer term picture that I'd like to see play out. And of course, we might break down, and if we do, I'll generate a plan based on that. But right now, the price action is looking quite bullish, and we are challenging that trend line. So I'm going to work off the idea that we're going to break upwards over the next week or two. So now let's drop down onto the hourly chart to see if we can spot any setups that might come into play today or tomorrow. So if we just zoom out just to get a broader picture of the price action that we're seeing. So as we know, we're approaching this trend line, which means that I'm not really wanting to get into the market long while we're still under that trend line, because that trend line is still pretty solid resistance. And if we get long, we've got a trouble area almost immediately. So we see a couple of ticks upwards and we're just hitting resistance. And then we'll get some chop, and that's just a painful area to be in a trade long. So I'm not looking to get long at all at the minute. But one thing that would make me want to get involved in a trade would be if we can break through and then pop around and retest this trend line from above, as well as seeing a retest of this resistance. That would be perfect. That would be an optimal place for me to get involved in a trade. So we can see here that we've got some pretty significant resistance, and then we have a few touches over here as well. And as we approach this trend line, if we can firmly break up through, just like that, and then round and come back, and ideally that point there would be perfect. where we get the intersection of the back of the trend line as well as that new support zone that was previous resistance. If we can find that area, if we can break up through and then find that area again, that will be a zone that I'm looking to get involved in the market. But right now, I don't want to get long because we have this trend line resistance, and my medium term, like week to 2 week bias here is that we're going to see a bit of further upward action. So I don't want to get short either. So I think it's actually quite unlikely that I take a trade today at all, because the market's just not really conducive. It's in one of these like limbo zones where you could get long and just get immediately stopped out because the market hits resistance and plunges. We also don't want to get short, because if we do end up breaking this resistance and the trend line, we're probably going to do it with quite a lot of force. Best case scenario here is you get into a trade and you have to sit through a lot of painful chop as the market's going up and down around this resistance area, and then maybe it breaks up and you hit target. But either way, it's not going to be an easy trade, and why take the difficult trade when we can just wait that extra bit longer and get into a trade setup that is much more conducive to less stress and a higher probability setup. Yeah, that's pretty much my thoughts on Bitcoin today. Probably not going to get involved in the market unless we do see a breakup and a retest of this level, ideally with the confluence of the trend line and the resistance. But one thing you do need to keep in mind here is that we want to break above the level and the trend line and stay above it before we come back and retest it. Otherwise, if you're just waiting for a punch through and you get in immediately on the retest, you're setting yourself up to be caught on the wrong side of a fake out. So maybe the market breaks up, fakes the market out and comes plunging back, and you get in on that retest and the market just keeps going down and you get stopped out in record time. So we don't want that. We want it to punch up through, stay above that resistance, stay above the trend line, maybe chop around a bit, find a new level of price acceptance, and then pull back into our level, into the trend line. That's the point that we want to start getting into the market. And exactly how we'll enter the market, where we put our stops, where we put our targets, that's something that I'll discuss as the market develops a bit further and we can start to see a potential setup that we could get into. But for now, like I said, I'm just going to sit on the sidelines and sort of take it easy and just watch the market develop, really, because it's quite an interesting juncture right now where we're seeing this fight between the log trend line and the linear trend line. We've kind of focused on the log trend line because we are approaching it and it does look like we might punch through. But what if it's the linear trend line that's actually in play and the break that we saw yesterday is still valid? In that case, a scenario that might play out is that we retest that linear trend line from above. So if we take a look at it here, we might see a bit of consolidation today, or maybe not. Maybe we just come straight back. We retest this trend line from above, which will also coincide with some previous support here, and then maybe find a move upwards. So maybe that's something that will play out. If that is the scenario that plays out, I'll probably sit on the sidelines through that because I tend not to like buying previous support. So if we come down into this area, I don't really want to be getting involved. I want to get involved if we break up and retest resistance as support. So if we drop down and find support on previous support areas on the back of this trend line, then I'm just going to sit it out on the sidelines and wait for a better setup. So that's really all I'm thinking about today. It's probably not going to be too exciting of a day, but I think it will be quite an interesting day to see just how this battle of the trend lines plays out. So until tomorrow's video, I will see you later.